All right, hey everyone. So just checking in now for another live stream, some essay feedback, some Q&A. I will just let some people join now. Excited to give some feedback as we approach the end of term. I know we've got trials starting next term for a majority of students. Some students are doing their trials end of this term, which is pretty brutal, but I guess it's trying to prepare you for the HSC in a more thorough way. Some schools actually do two sets of trials, which is always interesting. But majority of students will be doing their trial HSC in the first few weeks. I would say from week 3 through to say week 6 or 7 next term. So interested to see how everyone goes. Hello, we have someone joining us. Not sure how to say your name on there. Sus Nguyen? Maybe it's like Susan Nguyen or something like that. Sorry if I'm mispronouncing it. But welcome and thanks for joining. If you're the first to comment, so first to comment gets a guaranteed spot on a Jeddle Mastermind show. So if you want to go on the Mastermind show and play for $100 or some other cash prize, I mean, it's incremental as well, then you can join. You can actually send us an email and you can actually be on an episode. So send an email to hello@jeddle.com if you want to be on Mastermind because you were the first to comment. So just refer back to this and we'll make sure you get a spot if you want to play. We actually had someone, I think it was Reedy last time, win $100 playing Mastermind. So we're going to release that episode soon on the YouTube channel. Hey, Groovy, nice to see you again, as always. Guys, we're about to go through a sample paragraph that someone has written. So tune in for that. I'm going to break down a real essay response by a student so that you can apply some of that feedback to your own work. So excited to go through this with you. But if anyone has any questions before we get into that, please do ask. I know it's getting to the end of term. As I said, if you're in year 12 and studying in New South Wales, you've got the trials coming up, or maybe they're very soon. Maybe they're around the corner for you, depending on what school you're at. So ask away in terms of study techniques, how to prepare for each section, specific essay questions that you might be dealing with right now for assessments. Now is the time to ask. So I am all ears, keen to help out. Let me know how I can help in the comments section, and I will get to those. Otherwise, in about a minute, just bear with me, in about a minute, I'm going to start providing feedback on a student response. I've got a body paragraph in front of me, and it's a pretty high quality one as well. So it's going to be good for you guys to actually see how I break it down, and we can go from there. Now, before we get into it, we've got a question here from Groovy. Appreciate the input there. How do you prepare for short answers leading to trials, and ideally how often? Well, this is a good question because the short answer section is typically the most neglected section when it comes to preparation. So when we're looking at section 1 of paper 1, and you're thinking about how you're going to respond to these unseen questions, it can be a little bit confusing or unclear as to how you actually prepare. Because with the essays, it's very straightforward. You're just going to prepare your drafts. You're going to perfect those drafts. You're going to time them. You're going to get feedback on them. You are then going to try and learn them really well to the point of memorizing them. You're then going to look at a bunch of different questions and practice adapting to all of those different essay question types. The craft of writing is very similar. Lots of practice. You can learn some core drafts there. But with short answers, you just have to do a lot of practice. So it's informed practice, though. Don't just grab a practice paper for the short answer section and just say, this is the way I'm going to revise. The first thing I would recommend doing is revising over your techniques, your go-to techniques for different text types. And I've got lots of videos of this online. So just check out the YouTube channel for the different text types, like how to analyze poetry, how to analyze prose fiction. You need to have a huge bank of techniques that you can rely on when you are looking at a short answer paper. Because you don't get that much time, and time is of the essence when you do short answers, you theoretically get 45 minutes. You've got 10 minutes of reading time on top of that, but that time goes super quickly. You've got quite a few questions to answer, and you've got a few texts to analyze that you haven't looked at before. So the time's going to go super quickly. So instead of just doing a practice question, what I would recommend is writing down each text type, and visual might not be asked. They tend not to ask about visual text anymore, especially if you're advanced, but you still want to prepare for that. But I would say if you're doing English advanced and even standard, I would revise the visual texts last, even though you'll be tempted to revise those first because, visual texts are fun and they're a little bit easier. And there's not all these words that I have to deconstruct and reconcile and, extrapolate meaning from. So try not to fall into the temptation of just studying images and the visuals. Leave that to last. Go through poems. Poems like always come up, and they're typically first. Also prose fiction and nonfiction. Okay, so prose fiction is like an extract out of a novel. You'll find lots of those in the past papers, and then the nonfiction extracts as well, including feature articles. Maybe it's an extract from a biography or an autobiography, something like that that's in the nonfiction category as well. So poetry, nonfiction, and fiction are the three core ones that I'd be revising the techniques for. So learn what techniques are common among those. From the YouTube channel, if you've been watching, that we have some easy to remember techniques through the acronyms MEST. MEST is best, right? Modality, emotive language, syntax, tone. So make sure you're fresh on all of those, and you are remembering how to actually find each type of technique. So if it's modality, what words typically indicate high modality? Well, words like must, right? I shall, I am, I was. Low modality, perhaps, maybe. So try and get a feel for the type of words that will indicate to you whether a particular technique might be being used in a particular text. So familiarize yourself with those core techniques for each text type, right? Find ways to remember those, and then you go and do your practice. Now, how often should you be practicing doing these short answer papers in the lead up? Well, it needs to be balanced. It needs to be proportionate to the amount of marks that are attributable to it. So short answers are 20% of the exam. They're 20% of your total mark. So 20 out of 100, that means you're going to spend 20% of your English revision time or study time on section 1. So that's how I would work it out. The form of study is different. As I mentioned, if you're studying for essays, you're going to be perfecting those core draft essays for each module. You're then going to get feedback, time it out, practice new questions. That's a whole process. You have to do that for each essay. And then the craft of writing has a similar process. The short answers, even though you're just going to be doing practice questions, should still technically get the same amount of time. I would say it probably won't get as much time, but get as close to spending 20% of your English study time on the comprehension section, on the short answer section as possible. Okay, as close to 20% of that time. Now, let's say you're doing 5 hours a week on English. That means 1 hour, one paper, essentially. So if you want a rule of thumb, just do one paper a week in the lead up. And then when you get really close, like a week out from your actual exam, try to spend a little bit more time on it. Okay, I would definitely say that short answers is one of those things that you just want to be really fresh on, but you don't need to go hard out on short answer revision when you're 6 weeks out. I would say this is when you need to be getting all your draft essays ready and your craft of writing drafts as well. Now is probably not the time to be going hard on short answers, but as you get closer, you want to be doing more and more on short answers when you're doing somewhat less on the essays. So that's probably the best way to approach it. More on the essay preparation now, if you're 6 to 8 weeks out from trials, more on the craft of writing preparation now, get all of that in order. And as you get closer, up the amount of time that you're spending on short answers. Okay, that's a good rule of thumb, right? Closer to the exam, the more short answer I'm doing. The week before short answers, the couple of days before you do paper 1 of English, you want to be doing lots of short answer practice because you want to be super sharp with it. Doing lots of prep now isn't going to make you that sharp later, but I would do a little bit now. Pepper it in, do 1 paper every week, and then up that as you get closer to the exam. There's no precise formula, but make sure when you're going through it, you're revising the techniques, you're practicing finding them really quickly, and you're practicing making really concise and effective links to the question. Understand the bare minimum structure that you need for different question types for short answers. Again, I have lots of videos on YouTube for that, how to answer a 3-mark question, how to answer a 4-mark. Go and have a look at that and stick to that structure. don't write more than you actually have to, because that is going to be very detrimental to your marks. It's going to take a lot of time away from the essay section, which you should always do second. You should always do short answer first, but it's also going to take time away from the other questions. So you need to practice getting very concise with your answers by knowing the structure, by just writing what you need to, and by getting straight to the point, answering the question directly, but also being really quick at identifying techniques. So a few things, a few areas there, right? If I was to summarize those areas that you want to be really good at for short answers, it's learn how to learn the structure for each question type. So how much do I need to write for each type of question? Memorize that structure. For a 3-marker, I need 3 sentences. I need a topic sentence and then 2 techniques with 2 links to the question in my explanation. So learn those structures off by heart and then practice doing those. That was just an example for the 3-marker. So that's the first thing. Learn the structure for each question type in terms of the marks so that you know how much to write. So know how much to write, know how to identify techniques really quickly. Okay, know how to identify techniques really quickly. And that's by revising over the techniques and, studying up, looking at Jeddle resources, look at our YouTube channel, look at other resources to quickly learn those techniques and apply them. And then thirdly, it's practice making really concise but specific links to the question in every sentence of your answers. Okay, every answer that you write for the short answers has to have a direct link to the question. It has to be meaningful. So they're the 3 areas that I would be practicing for short answer. The 3 areas to practice for short answer: know the structure for different question types, for different mark allocations, 3-marker, 4-marker, 5-marker, 6-marker. Know how to identify techniques really quickly for each type of text: poetry, prose fiction, nonfiction, visual. Remember, visual is less important. And thirdly, know how to make a direct and concise link to the question in every sentence of your answer. Okay, they're the core skills for short answers. The other key tip was, for anyone else joining now, if you're studying for short answers, up the amount of study that you're doing as you get closer and closer to the exam. Spend more time on the essay preparation and craft of writing now. Spend more time on the short answer preparation later, but still do a little bit now. 1 hour a week, 1 paper a week, good rule of thumb. Okay, another question. I have an upcoming Module C task soon. During the exam, what would be some things that can make a creative writing piece notable compared to other students? Okay. During the exam, what would be some things that can make? Well, let's just address that. During the exam, I'm going to assume this is an in-class assessment from the way you've worded it, and correct me if I'm wrong there, but I just want to address this wording here. During the exam, what would be some things that can make your creative writing piece stand out? That language is concerning me. I'm now not concerned in a negative way. I'm just, I want to make sure that I correct any potentially false assumptions you might have about how to approach this exam. Because the way you're wording it there, during the exam, how am I going to stand out? No, it's when preparing for your exam and building the draft that you're essentially going to write on the day, how do I stand out, right? It's not just an on-the-day performance, Module C. Even though you need to be very flexible, you need to be very much adaptable and willing to change parts of your draft that you might have. You need to be willing to sacrifice a lot of it. That does not mean that you can't prepare a solid draft that exemplifies your understanding of that text type, how to write an imaginative, discursive, persuasive, and your understanding, more importantly, of how to use particular language features or stylistic devices that a mentor text, that a prescribed text has used, okay? I would still have a full draft ready to go, but I'd be willing to sacrifice a lot of it, if not all of it, if necessary. I've never seen a situation where I've had to sacrifice everything. I'm saying where I've had to, but where a student I've been working with or a student that's come to me with their draft and they said, oh, I couldn't adapt this to this stimulus. I've never seen a situation where it wasn't possible. You need to be very flexible with the way you interpret the stimulus and the question. You're saying the question is unknown. That's okay. Of course it's unknown, but once you see it, it's about how do I interpret that in a way that benefits me? Interpret the stimulus so it works for you, so that it works for your draft, not the other way around, okay? You need to use the stimulus to your advantage so that it allows you to explore something that you actually want to write about that you'd actually prepared in advance. So don't think that the time that you're going to stand out is during the exam. The time that you're going to stand out is when preparing weeks in advance of the exam. Now, you've said you've got the task coming up soon. Even if it's later this week or next week, the key is going to be how do I actually prepare a draft and prepare some ideas and put them into practice in a way that's going to help me stand out, that's not going to look the same as everyone else. Well, first of all, if you want to drop some more context on the prescribed text you've been looking at the requirements of the task, like do you know whether you need to do an imaginative, discursive, or persuasive piece of writing? Just give me any context there while I'm going through this. That might help. But generally speaking, I'm going to give you a really important point, a really important tip. This is for everyone listening. If you want to stand out in Module C, here's something that I found helps everyone stand out. Well, it doesn't help everyone stand out, right? That's a bit of a contradiction. It helps everyone that follows the tip stand out, okay? The tip is, this key point is, write about the craft of writing itself. Don't just write about anything. So assume you have a stimulus or a question that says, write an imaginative based on this image or based on this quote. Link it to the idea of what it's like to be a writer, or what it's like to be exploring the idea of fiction, or something to do with literature, something to do with the craft of producing something, of creating something. Now, what I mean by that is, the most basic example would be, you write an imaginative response about a writer. So your piece is about someone who's a writer. You as a writer are writing about someone who is also a writer. That creates this kind of meta-fictional layer. And that is more sophisticated because you're examining the process of writing within your piece because you're actually writing about that process. So you could explore someone struggling to write and put them in a particular context or setting that makes sense, maybe one that connects with one of the prescribed texts that you've studied. But write about the craft of writing, be metatextual in that sense. That's a key tip, okay? A second tip for how you can stand out is to be, now that did connect to the form, right? That's called being metatextual or metafictional in the sense that you're writing about writing. And it doesn't just have to be writing about the process of writing. You could write about the nature of fiction and non-fiction, or how do you know what's real in fiction or literature, etc., or what's the importance of literature over time, which is ironic because you are producing a piece of literature while exploring the value of literature. So you can do crafty things like that. The second tip is to be experimental with your form. So with the way you write, be playful, do something that is unexpected for the marker, for the reader, right? So an example of that would be to have kind of an internal dialogue going on in your piece. It could be a discursive piece, an imaginative piece, but basically show on each side of the page the back and forth conversation that is taking place inside the speaker's mind, okay? Because we all have those voices in our head, right? We have, voice of reason, voice of impulse. So have those two voices speaking to each other, be telling the story, be exploring a topic or an issue that relates to your prescribed text, but then have these kind of interjections from the other part of the speaker's mind. Okay, and you can literally show that physically. You can literally show that on the page by having those interjections on the right side of the page. You normally write from left to right, so just solely on the left side, on the right side of the page, you could have little interjections. That's an example of being experimental with the form. If you're doing an imaginative, you could also do something non-linear. So you could have flashbacks and flash forwards. So these are things that just help you stand out just by the way that the piece has actually been structured and composed. Okay, so experimental form was the second tip. First tip, again, was to use more metatextual language where you're aware of the process of writing and you're exploring something about writing, fiction, literature. They're kind of two really key tips. And the third tip, if you want to stand out, that means do what most students aren't doing. And this is a more basic writing tip. Go for depth over breadth. Don't try and tackle everything in your piece. Don't, if you're doing an imaginative piece or you're doing a creative writing piece where you have an element of a story in there, don't have too much plot. Make sure there's not too much happening. Focus more on the reflection. Focus more on the depth of imagery so that we actually believe your story. We feel as though we're there. We can visualize it. So lots of imagery, and try and expand on every piece of description that you provide, rather than just saying, Jonny walked to the shops. He then did this. He then did this. He then went to his car. He then went back home. Jonny walked to the shops, right? Then now give me a description, expand. So every time something happens, expand for a couple of sentences. Jonny walked to the shops. He felt like all of a sudden the walls were closing in. Everyone was staring at him, right? It was as though it was as though that he had shrunk, right? He had shrunk down in the middle of the shopping center. Okay, well, he must feel really like anxious or paranoid. Okay, so you're evoking an emotion through the imagery, through the description. And ideally, those connections will actually be linked to the stimulus as well at times. But that's the idea. So if one thing happens, there should be like 3 sentences at least that follow, general rule of thumb here, that elaborate on the image, on the tone, on the mood. Tell us what the person is seeing, hearing, feeling, okay? Get that depth and make sure that not too much happens in your piece. You should really be elaborating on the few issues or the few things that happen in the piece, okay? So go for depth over breadth is my last tip on how to improve the quality of your writing. Just have a look at that further context. It's an imaginative, excuse me, it's an imaginative combined with mod B, and my prescribed text is Emma. So you're doing an imaginative. I'm assuming you're not using a module C prescribed text then, but you need to actually emulate something about Emma. And in that case, you need to understand at least 2 stylistic features that are used in Emma. So go and explore that. Look at the stylistic features that stand out in that piece. I know that there's an element of kind of third-person limited narration in that. Maybe that's going to be your narrative perspective. And then have a look at other prominent language devices that are used in Emma. Is there a lot of a particular type of imagery? What is it that's unique about the style of it? Is there a lot of dialogue? I tend to avoid dialogue in an imaginative, but if there is a lot of dialogue and that's something you want to use based on Emma, then make sure you're very deliberate about that. The task will be framed around writing a diary entry or letter as a character in the novel. Okay, great. So these are all things you can prepare for. I don't know if you're going to be given the character. Is that something that's unknown? But you can nonetheless choose a character that could be adapted to another character pretty easily. So between Emma or one of the other main female characters, you could kind of choose between them. And then if they're doing a diary entry, make sure that it's about something that all of the female characters or a lot of the female characters would be talking about. Now, sure, the character might have a different perspective. Like Emma's perspective might be more controversial or atypical because she doesn't share the same views as others, but still talk about a topic that any of those characters would be interested in. We know that with Emma, right, if we're talking about the idea of matchmaking, if matchmaking is a big topic in that, where it's all about finding a match romantically, but she doesn't want to conform to that because she wants to preserve her individuality, if that's the key tension there, then make that the subject of the diary entry. So stay close to the novel in that sense and build that diary entry. I mean, it's funny you're saying it's a diary entry, but it's also an imaginative. So it would have to be clarified whether or not the diary entry is part of a broader imaginative or the whole thing is a diary entry, in which case that would be interesting in terms of making that an imaginative. I mean, it is made up. You can detail what happened that day in the diary entry, so you just frame it retrospectively. So there's a diary entry, the character is talking about what happened that day. It's something very important. Always just focus on a moment of tension. So whatever you choose to talk about in a piece should be the most important thing that happens, the most important tension. So again, for Emma, because it's all about matchmaking and her struggling between, preserving her individuality, but also finding romantic love and companionship, and in some ways conforming to gender norms and roles, because that's the tension. Make that the topic of the piece. Excuse me. Make sure that the thing that she's reflecting on in the diary entry or letter is a very important moment where she's having to grapple with that tension. Okay, so that's what I'd focus on, and that's how I'd kind of approach it more generally. How do I go about preparing an adaptable ModC piece? I struggle with coming up with ideas. Okay, Piper, great question. Thanks for asking that. So if you are struggling coming up with an idea for a creative writing piece, then the first thing I would tell you to do, I would advise you to do, is go and look at one of the prescribed texts that you have studied for Module C. Because in Module C, you have to study at least 2 texts in class. And from one of those texts, at least, you actually have to draw inspiration in terms of the stylistic elements or the language features that you use in your own piece. So you study these texts in class for this module so that you can learn different ways of writing, certain techniques to use, like how to use imagery or how to use a first-person voice for a particular reason, right? There might be other things, of course. How do you incorporate flashbacks or anecdotes, things like that. You study these texts so that you learn how to write, but I would also look at least one of those texts in terms of informing what you write about. So when you're coming up with an idea, Piper, and for everyone else who's wondering how to come up with ideas for creative writing, well, look at the text that you've actually studied and play around with the concern or idea that's explored in that text. So you make sure your idea stems from the idea within another text that you've already studied. So don't just start from scratch when you're thinking about the idea. Make sure the idea is about something connected to a text you've already studied. That will make your life so much easier. Just choose to offer one different perspective on it. Do it slightly differently to how that particular composer did it. Maybe you're doing a more contemporary version of that piece. Now, another tip goes back to what I said earlier. If you struggle with coming up with ideas, then write about the process of writing itself. Depending on whether you're an imaginative, discursive, persuasive, that's going to dictate the precise way you approach it. But if you're writing about a writer, maybe you are an author, right? You're an author trying to write a piece about a controversial topic. You're not sure how to approach it. Or you're doing a discursive and it's exploring different types of writers. Where do ideas come from? Reflect your own struggle now with coming up with an idea in the discursive itself. See how meta that is? So you can write about someone trying to come up with an idea and then contemplate all the potential sources of ideas. So you kind of share that exploration, and you should do a little bit of research into it, but think about where you might get an idea. Can you get an idea from your past? Can you get an idea from another text like we just talked about? That is part of the discursive exploration. You can actually go through and they're the different perspectives that you're considering. Oh, maybe I get an idea from another text and I interpret that. I use intertextuality. I actually link what I'm saying to another text and I create something new. Maybe I have to think back to my past and I recreate a moment from the past. Or maybe I think about my desires and fantasies and I actually get an idea from my imagination. And then those 3 things are the different sources of ideas. And you explore that in your piece and you detail that process of going through them. And that is what your piece is about. So just like that, you can come up with a really solid premise for your piece by reflecting your struggle with writing through the piece itself. Okay, if there are no other questions for now, really good questions coming through here. I'm just going to jump over to the example because I do want to quickly go through an example with some essay feedback. I'm doing it on Jeddle's platform. If you haven't tried it out yet, please do try it. Email through with any feedback you have on it. If you want to see something else on there, if something's not working for you, let us know and we will fix it. Okay, so we're basically building the ultimate feedback platform for you. So whenever you want to get feedback on your essays, you have somewhere to go to get reliable, high-quality feedback. Just like you might have a tutor. You might see a tutor once a week, right? I still tutor people once a week. There are times where you can help them, But what about when you want additional feedback? What about when it's not in that hour? What if you don't have a tutor? What if you want to get another source of feedback, some additional comments? Then you'd want to have somewhere to go. So that's why we've got Jeddle's feedback tool, Jedd-AI. You can get immediate feedback, or you can get feedback from someone from our team, expert markers. Okay, so right now you can actually trial it out for free, and you just jump onto Jeddle.com, go to Jedd-AI, and Jedd-AI will allow you to get real human expert feedback, like I'm going to show you now, or you can get immediate AI feedback based on teacher trained data. Okay, so it's going to help you improve your essays you're writing straight away. Again, if you have any feedback on it, if you want to see something else on the platform, email me, email the team, let us know, and we'll make it happen. Okay, so that's what we're building. So if you want to be part of that as you go through your trials in HSE, or if you're in another year group and you're keen to get on board, just go over to Jeddle.com and check that out. Now, I'm going to share the other screen that I've got here, and we can go through this together. So hopefully this is going to work for us. Let's see if we can get it happening. Hopefully this is coming up for you. All right, cool. So this is the Jeddle platform. Right now I'm in the feedback hub. Okay, I'm in the feedback hub. I'm just going to make sure that I'm in the right spot here. Do I want to go here? I don't mind going here. Give me a second. Okay, I'm cool there. All right, so let's have a look at this particular response. Someone has submitted a body paragraph on T.S. Eliot. So they've submitted this through Jeddle's feedback hub. Okay, so if you go to Jedd-AI on Jeddle.com, you can start a free trial and submit your essays for feedback from the experts or from Jedd-AI itself. Now, let's go through this and read the question. They've done a body paragraph in response to this question, okay? It's a Module B question on T.S. Eliot. If you're not doing T.S. Eliot, that doesn't matter. Look at what I'm doing in terms of the feedback, in terms of breaking it down, because you'll be able to apply all of this to any essay. The value of great texts is that they continue to speak to us. How do such notions account for the value of Eliot's poetry? In your response, make detailed reference to at least 2 of Eliot's poems. Okay, so what's this question about? The value of great texts is that they continue to speak to us. So this question kind of taps into that textual integrity idea in this module. The idea that a text is so cohesive, is so universal that it transcends temporal boundaries. The text is so resonant with our human nature that we will continue to resonate with it. Okay, we will continue to connect with what it's exploring. So this question wants us to focus on how Eliot's themes, how his form as well, the form and themes, what he's talking about, how he's written his poetry, how that continues to speak to us. What is it about the ideas in this, in the poetry, that actually connect with us as humans and don't depend on Eliot's particular context? Even though all of his poetry was a product of his context, what is it about it that's universal? That's what this is getting at. Okay, so this is a body paragraph. Let's have a look. In an attempt to overcome paralysis of his world, as evidenced in Prufrock and Preludes, Eliot's persona encounters the possibility of spiritual enlightenment in the Journey of Magi, 1927. Okay, so a couple of questions straight off the bat, right? You might be thinking, why has this referenced 2 other texts before going into this third text, Journey of the Magi? This paragraph is seemingly going to go only into detail for Journey of the Magi, although it's also going to refer to other poems. Okay, let's break that down. Why would you refer to multiple poems in a paragraph on T.S. Eliot's poetry? You would do so because you are studying T.S. Eliot's poetry as a whole. So even though there are 5 different poems that you look at, you're actually studying them as a set, as a collection. So it does make sense to refer to multiple poems throughout a paragraph. You don't need to do that. You can just refer to 1 poem per paragraph, because if you do that across 3 paragraphs, you're still looking at the poetry altogether. You're just looking at in different sections, but you can also cross-reference what this student's doing here by referring to Prufrock and Preludes, which are 2 other poems, different to the main poem that's explored in this paragraph. This student here is cross-referencing, and that's good. It can work, okay? Cross-referencing is good. Now, you don't need to do it. We'll see if it's effective here. In an attempt to overcome paralysis of his world, I mean, obviously the word is not quite right there grammatically. In an attempt to overcome paralysis of his world, the paralysis, what type of paralysis? I would say existential paralysis. But what I'm doing there is I'm actually being specific. So see how this sounds kind of vague? In an attempt to overcome paralysis of his world. Like, it sounds nice, but there's a lot of big words there that don't have much qualification. We need to qualify it. What type of paralysis? What type of world? Okay? So just by expanding a little bit on this, I think we can improve it, okay? In an attempt to overcome the existential paralysis of his, what is it? What kind of world? Urbanized world? Modernist world? Yeah, it's definitely a modernist world. I mean, that's the form of his poetry. But we could say in an attempt to overcome the existential paralysis of his, I'll put urbanized / modernist. It'll depend on what's been explored in other parts of the essay, to be honest. Urbanized world. Maybe it's more like fragmented world, right? But let's go with that for now. I don't think we need the as evidenced in Prufrock and Preludes, because it's like, have you already spoken about that? So even though it is good to cross-reference, here it kind of doesn't make sense. I haven't seen the paragraphs before and after, though, to be fair, but I know that this paragraph focuses mainly on Magi. So it feels like you're kind of cramming these poems in now, and you're not going to give them their due attention. They need to get more attention. They shouldn't just be crammed in here as evidenced in these poems. Well, did you already talk about those poems? If you did talk about those poems, maybe you can keep it like that. Otherwise, you can probably get rid of that. I would probably remove that, okay? Cross-referencing as a general principle is good. Doesn't need to happen in your topic sentence, and I wouldn't do it there unless you've already referenced those poems in depth, in detail, earlier in the essay. Okay. Before I continue, I'm just going to quickly check on the chat, see that everything's making sense. No, all good. Okay, for everyone watching, appreciate your attention. Hopefully this is helpful. So topic sentences, really important that you're specific with what you're saying. So many students do these types of topic sentences where they're being too vague. So make sure you get specific there. Eliot's persona encounters the possibility of spiritual enlightenment in the journey of the Magi. Okay. And if you've already referenced a poem in its full form in the introduction, which you should have, so assuming there was an introduction that had the journey of the Magi in there, you would just be referencing it as Magi now. So you don't need to do the full title once you've already introduced the full title in your introduction. Okay, so see how the title here is The Journey of Magi. We would just make that Magi. And we would have said in the introduction, we're going to refer to the Journey of the Magi as Magi. You just do that in brackets next to the full title when you initially bring it in. Excuse me. That's going to save you a lot of words. Now, Eliot's persona encounters the possibility of spiritual enlightenment. This feels a little bit like your storytelling rather than providing the concept, the idea. So just be very careful with the word in here. Eliot's persona encounters the possibility. I would actually go more for Eliot conveys the possibility, suggests the possibility, contemplates the possibility, rather than a persona encountering. It sounds too much like you're telling the story, but you could certainly bring that language in the next sentence when you're leading into your analysis. So I would go, Eliot contemplates the possibility, right? He's seeing if there is a possibility. Maybe it's a stronger word if you really feel like he is suggesting that. Maybe he's emphasizing, okay? So verb selection is important. And the other thing that's important to note that's not referenced here from what I can see is context. You don't need to get context into this same sentence because it's getting a little bit bulky. But certainly afterwards, it would be good to reference the key contextual influence behind this particular poem. So for anyone doing an essay, make sure you always consider the relevance, the potential relevance of the author's context in shaping the meaning of the text. In this case, because we're talking about the possibility of spiritual enlightenment, which is a good concept, so you get a tick for that. That's a good concept. Because we're talking about it, we need to think, why did Eliot choose to write about that? And actually, 1927 was the year that Eliot converted to Anglo-Catholicism. So he was on his own spiritual journey. That's really important. We need to reference that. So I'm just going to put a note at the end, whether it's in that sentence or after. We need to say that this was inspired by his own personal conversion, right? His own, maybe just own. We don't need to have a tautology there. Inspired by his own conversion to Anglo-Catholicism, and I think it was in that same year. Right? Now, that's what I would be trying to get in there. So you can see just now, I'd put it in like that. You can see there are a lot of small things that we could improve with this particular topic sentence, okay? I won't necessarily be as thorough with the other sentences, but the topic sentence is so important that it's worth you picking up on a few of those areas that might be missing. Okay, so specificity, a link to context, okay, and no unnecessary references to other texts or information. And finally, don't frame things like you're storytelling, like it's descriptive. Like, don't tell me what happens in your topic sentence. Tell me what it's about. Why is the author conveying this particular idea? And what is that idea? Okay, what is that idea rather than what happens? It needs to sound like what is it rather than what happens. Okay. The journey of the Magi, I'm just going to say Magi. Magi parallels Eliot's personal journey. Well, here you go. Straight away as I say that, there you go. Parallels Eliot's personal journey. So I guess that's where you can actually say, and this is the first time I'm looking at this, by the way. That's why I haven't read ahead here. Parallels Eliot's personal journey through its long allusions. Does it say something about Anglo? Okay, so you weren't specific. Personal journey. What personal journey? That's where you link it to Anglo-Catholicism, his conversion. You want to be specific with your references to context. Okay? We need to be more specific. Sorry, I keep getting that wrong. No, Anglo, that's fine. So we need to be specific here about the context. Through its long allusion. Long is unnecessary there, okay? I won't make a comment on everything here, but keep it concise. Parallels Eliot's personal conversion to Anglo-Catholicism through its allusion to the three wise men. Well, it's a religious allusion or it's a biblical allusion. So we just make that biblical. I will make a note now because that's an easy fix. Biblical allusion. Make sure you give the most specific and precise type of technique that's being used in your analysis. Biblical allusion there. All right. Where the Magi attempt to answer Prufrock's overwhelming question. I like that. See, that's good cross-referencing. This student has referred back to Prufrock, right? We didn't need to reference Prufrock in the topic sentence, but a nice cross-reference here with a quotation to show that textual integration, right? That textual cohesion. So I really like that. Prufrock's overwhelming question. I'll tell you what's great about what this student's done that you can all learn from. It's a short quote, but it's effective. This poem is providing an answer to the overwhelming question in another poem. Fantastic use of a short quote. All right, so that's something everyone can learn from. Through their metaphoric journey to Bethlehem. Okay. Okay, we'll accept that sentence. It's still analytical from the point of view of, including techniques and showing a linkage. Now we want to get into it, which it does. And this is why this response is really strong overall. In the poem's opening, the use of pathetic fallacy, that's where you ascribe personal attributes to nature, right? So it's like personification, but it relates to nature typically. So in this case, it relates to the season, the weather, winter. The use of pathetic fallacy to describe the very dead of winter. So it's describing winter as dead. So it's giving a personal attribute, somewhat personal attribute to winter. It's not the strongest example of pathetic fallacy, but we'll accept it. Normally, if it was like the rain was crying with tears because it was sad, right? That's pathetic fallacy, right? The sadness of the moon. It's a feeling, a human feeling attributed to some part of nature. Often the weather, okay? So what the student's done here is they have actually combined two different techniques, which is a more sophisticated way of, and it's a smarter way, it's a more efficient way of getting all of that analysis in if you can do it effectively. So the use of pathetic fallacy, it begins the sentence, the student begins the sentence with a technique and then follows it up with another complementary technique. So it is pathetic fallacy combined with the visceral imagery. So notice, just in this first part of the sentence, this student's already hit two techniques. So if you want to do that, you need to open with the technique. Always lead with the technique to avoid storytelling. And it combines with visceral imagery of the camels, gold, sore-footed, and refractory. And then the student has said that this extends the sordid atmosphere of Prufrock and Preludes. This is where we now run into a bit of trouble with the cross-referencing because now it's slightly overdone, right? So hopefully what you're getting from this is it's a balancing act. I really like the integration up here where it referred back to the overwhelming question, but now these references are starting to replace a more detailed analysis of this particular aspect of this poem, okay? So you've talked about all these techniques, and then all you've said is it extends the sordid atmosphere. That's not specific enough. That's not in-depth enough to get you to that band 6 level of analysis. The cross-reference actually is detracting in my mind because it's taking up space to provide a more in-depth analysis of these two very important techniques, the dead of winter and these camels, gold, sore-footed, refractory. You need to really dig deep into that and analyze what's going on. What is the purpose of that? It can't just be that it extends, i.e. repeats, the sordid atmosphere of two other poems. That's not enough. You then go on to say, this contributes to the ambivalent nature of the journey. Okay, well, I feel like this stuff needs to go up here where you say extends. It needs to replace that. So you can probably get rid of this bit. We can just eliminate that for the sake of concision. Remove that part of the sentence. This contributes to the ambivalent nature of the journey. Okay, that's going to move up. So it's ambivalent. Ambivalent means uncertain. Ambivalent means uncertain. So it is an uncertain journey. I'm just reading those quotes again. I mean, I'm not sure. I'm trying to see if they convey uncertain. I mean, for me, the camels that they're traveling on are gold, sore-footed, and refractory. I mean, if you think of people with sore feet, they're tired, they're exhausted, they're spiritually drained, they're in need of spiritual replenishment. I don't know that I get ambivalent from it, although I know it's ambivalent from the point of view that you don't know if you're going to get to the end of your spiritual journey because it's so exhausting, it's so arduous and demanding. So it can make sense. I wouldn't say it's the clearest connection there. So we could be a little bit more specific with our explanation there. As epitomized in the metaphoric voices singing in our ears saying this was folly. So it sounds like you're still talking about these quotes up here, but then you've gone ahead to as epitomized in the metaphoric voices. So I think, and then you say suggesting Eliot's discomfort and even alienation from such pursuits. There's too much going on in this sentence. Part of the sentence, it sounds like, is you continuing your analysis of these quotes, But then all of a sudden you say as epitomized in, but it's like, no, it's as epitomized in the previous quotes that you were just analyzing. So to me, that's a little bit clunky. So make sure that the sentences are broken up so that it's clear when you're analyzing one piece of the text or another. Here, you're kind of combining them. So I don't think that works. So I think you need to avoid this, right? Avoid this expression and make the analysis clearly linked to one part of the text, because, or both parts of the text with the two quotes, is just unclear. All right. You've got Eliot's discomfort and even alienation. I mean, normally we would avoid the double up effect here, discomfort, alienation, but you've said and even, so it has a little bit more of your voice in that, which I like. Okay, so we'll let that one go. This bleak opening constructed by the cold, constructed by the cold coming of the winter landscape is, however, juxtaposed by the Magi's entrance into Temperate Valley, symbolizing a sense of regeneration as highlighted in the reference to the end of days, losing my breath, combined with the bucolic image of the horse galloped away in the meadow. See, that sentence has so much in it, but you're cramming too much into these sentences. I've seen that in 2 sentences now, right? Cramming too much into these sentences. Make one key point at a time rather than, because what the student's done is you can see bleak opening, juxtaposed, symbolizing, combined with the bucolic image of, right? So we're stacking too many techniques and quotes in the one sentence, right? It's completely unclear what your actual point is. So we need to split things up, make them more concise, go for shorter sentences here. Okay. All right. I'm going to quickly check in, see if there's any questions so far from you guys. Any questions, leave them in the comments. Leave them in the comments. I'm going to finish going through this with you guys in 1 second. Just bear with me for 1 second. Just need to do a little battery change on the camera. So I will be 1 sec. All right, thanks for waiting. So let's get back into this. Let's finish off this this feedback for this particular response. And if you do want to submit your own response, make sure you use the link below this video. Submit your work, and if you're happy for us to go through it online, then we'll do that for you. Help you out, help everyone else in the process as well. And again, if you want to get this kind of feedback, go to Jeddle.com, go to Jedd-AI, which is our AI and human expert feedback platform. So you can get feedback from our team of markers, but also from Jedd-AI itself, which is an amazing technology. So that's where you can do that. You can get that free access right now as well as you prepare for trials. All right. So Eliot, we're going from here as well. Here, Eliot ironically emulates an atmosphere of the green space, revitalizing imagery. Okay, I see. Here, Eliot, we need a few more commas and things like that, but I'll ignore those issues. Eliot ironically emulates an atmosphere of the green space, revitalizing imagery of the Romantic period. Yeah, I don't know if that's meant to be one word, but okay, revitalizing imagery of the Romantic period to suggest the poet's sense of certainty. I don't know if it's just to suggest the sense of certainty. The issue with part of this is that it's very strong from a technical point of view, but then it lacks a bit of depth and sophistication with the actual analysis. Like it identifies all the techniques, it uses really good language, but the conceptual detail here, right? How you're actually explaining the meaning of things, I think is lacking a little. That's what I'm noticing, right? So the explanations lack depth and sophistication. Like try to avoid just using generic terms like sense of certainty. You can see here they've just said sense of certainty. It's like, I'm kind of wondering what type of certainty? What do you mean by that? So there seems to be this sense of certainty. The ending of Magi is, however, highly ambiguous in its use of philosophical language, comma, as evident in the rhetorical question of birth or death, question mark, coupled with the sardonic tone of hard and bitter agony for us. Okay, so again, really strong technically in terms of rhetorical question, coupled with the sardonic tone. This is a good example of how to bring in lots of techniques and quotes in a response, although obviously this paragraph is too long. Definitely don't need a response this long, and you don't need to constantly couple techniques together. You don't feel like you have to do that. But all that it's really saying is that it's highly ambiguous. Let's see. Let's hopefully the student explains what they mean by that. Eliot leaves the reader with no clear answer. Okay, that relates to being ambiguous, to the overwhelming question, as further evidenced in. See what's happening? These techniques up here weren't really explained in depth, like birth or death. There's nothing in the effect that relates to those terms. There's just, it's highly ambiguous in its use of philosophical language. So all I really get from the effect there is it's highly ambiguous. There's nothing in there that relates to the question of birth or death. Hard and bitter agony for us. Where are the terms in the explanation that relate to what these quotes mean? So we need more depth in your explanation. So really good example here of strong technical language, but not enough on the conceptual side, not enough depth of explanation that connects with the question as well. We'll come back to the question because it's about it being a great text, because it's universal. You kind of want to pepper in language throughout this paragraph about things being timeless, things being inherently human, part of the human condition, right? Things being universal. Just little terms like that would connect to the question, and then you can do a more direct link in the topic sentence and link. But I haven't been focused too much on that because it's a very broad question. Okay, so here Eliot leaves the reader with no clear answer to the overwhelming question, right? It's just very vague. Vague, right? You need to say how, what is the significance of these specific quotes? Address this before moving on to the next technique. Therefore, while the journey of Magi does suggest that spiritual enlightenment is possible, okay, I guess there's one sentence on that. I think there's more evidence. You can do more with this poem to get more out of that spiritual enlightenment. It also leaves room for uncertainty. Again, like room for uncertainty. What does that mean? Certain, uncertain, no clear answer. Very vague language. We need to get more in depth here. Highlighting the challenges of reading modernist literature. Is this meant to link back to the question about great texts speaking to us? So this is like a disagreement with the question, which is fine. It doesn't speak to us. Maybe. But it is in such ambivalence that Eliot's poems of Proof Rock, Preludes, and Magi, again, like there's no need to bring these other two poems here. They don't serve a purpose. This paragraph was clearly about magi, so we would remove these. Allowing diverse and creative interpretations of his great texts. So overall, very strong technically, but not on the conceptual side. I feel like I'd leave this like thinking I wasn't sure specifically what you meant by all of that. Like I know generally you kept saying things were uncertain and certain, and that the ambivalence is important. I got that message from it, but I need more than that. I need much more specific explanations of these different quotes and techniques. So that would be the main thing for this student to work on. Even though it's too wordy as well. Like we'd want to cut this down from 300 words so that it's much more focused. You make each point is unique. The way that you make each point unique is to really look at the words of the quote that you've used and to think, I'm going to use a word that's similar or related to those words in my explanation of the effect. Okay? What's the effect of that quote? Let me look at the words of the quote carefully. For instance, the very dead of winter. What's a key word in that quote? The dead. Okay, dead. What's a related term to dead? Is it mortality? Okay, mortality relates to dead. Lifeless, right? Deprived of spiritual life. There we go. So we get an expression, right? So deprived of spiritual life. Deprived of spiritual life clearly relates to the dead of winter because the word dead and life are clearly connected. So look for expressions or words in the quote that you can actually create a related expression for, and then this goes into your explanation. Okay, that's the secret to creating meaningful and effective explanations of quotes and techniques. Okay, that's what the student needs to do more of. All right, I hope that was helpful for you. Again, if you want me to review your own work, you can submit it using the link below. It goes into a kind of lottery, not guaranteed. But as you prepare for trials, you probably want experts to be looking at your work. So make sure you go to Jeddle.com, go to Jedd-AI, and then you can get our team to provide feedback, or you can get Jedd-AI itself to provide that immediate feedback based on our patterns of marking. So pretty cool technology there. You can check that out on the website at Jeddle.com. Okay, so that's where you can get this kind of feedback to improve all your essays, your craft of writing pieces. So you can jump onto that now, and you can start for free as well. So if you just go over to the website, you'll find that. A couple more questions to answer here. I'm going to get out of this. All right, thanks for the question. When would it be appropriate to use critics to support a response in Module B? Do you think responses that reference a critic are stronger? Second question, I'll answer the second question first. Not necessarily. So an essay in Module B that references a critic won't necessarily be stronger, especially if it sounds like they're relying on the critic to make the argument for them. The key with Module B is it's a personal response that has been informed by critical readings. So you need to show in some way that you've considered other perspectives, and that's where a critic can be useful. But ultimately, the marker wants to hear your interpretation while understanding that you've actually considered other perspectives. Excuse me. So what's the balance here? One is you do not need to, as a general rule, you do not need to reference a specific critic in Mod B unless your teacher has specifically asked you to do so for the purpose of trials. In the final HSC, Mod B essays, I've seen Mod B essays get full marks without a reference to a critic. You can refer to critical theories more generally. That's a really powerful thing to do, like a feminist reading of the play, a psychoanalytic reading of the play. But the main thing is if you do reference a critic, don't do it in your introduction. This is a general rule, like you might get away with that, but if you are going to do it somewhere in your analysis. Maybe it's even in a link sentence, but maybe it's when you're analyzing a particular point, particular piece of evidence. When you use the critic, make sure they're not providing the whole point. So if you quote them, use a short quote and actually show that you're disagreeing with them or that you've been informed by them, but that you're extending on their idea, right? So you could say, you could present an idea and say, this is supported by, or this is extended by, or this contradicts, this goes against this critic's theory of, or this theory's contention that, quote, and then embed the quote in the sentence, but make it a short one from the critic. So you can look up critics, just go to Google Scholar. I think on the Jeddle resources, if you're on the Elliott resources, there's a bunch of really good critics to embed, and they just give you the best quotes from their works that can be embedded in your essay. But use a short quote and make sure that it's not making the point for you. That's the key. So it's an example of an expression would be, you bring in a quote from the text that you're studying, and you say, this represents this idea, which is supported by, or which is reinforced, or actually let the critic kind of add on to your argument. So you could say, let's say, for example, a critic is, we'll just come up with a random name. Beckley, okay? Beckley is the last name of a critic. You make your own point, and then you do a comma at the end, and you say, which Beckley terms, or which Beckley frames as a, and then quote, boom, and then put like a phrase that they came up with. Terms, like which Beckley terms as this. So the critic is kind of at the end of the sentence backing up what you're saying, or you can actually disagree with the critic and say, whereas, whilst Beckley argues, and that's a good phrase as well, whilst Beckley argues that, quote, and then give the short quotation from their work, comma, then present your view, right? You don't have to say it is my contention, although you could because it's personal, but I would typically avoid the my-I side of things. You could just frame it like, the metaphor here, in fact, if you say in fact, it shows you're actually disagreeing with what that person says. Whereas they argued this, the metaphor, in fact, or it is more likely, or it is arguable that the metaphor here conveys this idea, and then you present your own idea. So again, as long as they're not making the whole point, you'll be fine. 2 references, 2 different critics within your body paragraphs, more than enough if you're going to go through down that route. 1 per body paragraph, also an option if your teacher's asked you to include a critic. No critics is also possible unless your teacher has asked you to include a critic. Okay, so few options there. Just remember the main point. You typically don't need a critic unless your teacher has asked you to include it in your essay. Second point, if you are using a critic, make sure they're supporting your point with a short quotation from them, and that they're not making the point for you, that you're not relying on their idea and leaving it at that. You need to offer your own interpretation that is then backed up, or that you show contradicts or goes against that critic's point of view, because that shows you're engaging with those readings. Okay. How should I structure my Mod B notes and choose quotes when there are so many different aspects they can specify in the question? Excuse me. In terms of structuring Mod B notes, I just structure all the essay modules as a draft essay. There are no notes. So I would be working on a clear draft essay, figure out what your 3 key points are, and it depends on your Module B text piper. Just remind me if you've already told, I'm not sure if you've already told me, but let me know what your Mod B text is. Map out the structure, map out the key ideas, 1 per paragraph that you want to talk about. Map out the key pieces of evidence that are going to support each of those points, and make sure they're highly adaptable and well-chosen pieces of evidence. So make sure the evidence it relates to form, and maybe it has a contextual link. So that's a really strong piece of evidence, because then if you get a question you weren't expecting, at least you've got a really strong piece of evidence to support that overall point that you planned out. And because it links to context and it links to form, it's going to be highly adaptable and relevant no matter what. So use strong pieces of evidence that are based on the overall ideas that you want to explore, that are key, that you feel are really key to your understanding. And then you just adapt the way you word it on the day, and you practice that. Create a core draft essay for Module B based on your ideal question. Okay, perfect that. Then look at different types of questions and practice adapting your introduction, your topic sentences, and even the insides of the body paragraphs. That is how you're going to be ready to deal with any question, okay? You still need to have a core draft, but you also need to be ready to adapt and be flexible by rewording certain phrases. But you're still going to be making the same fundamental argument. Yeah, so you're doing curious incident of the dog in the nighttime. There's still the same main points to make no matter what, right? So come up with your core 3 paragraphs, Piper. If you're doing curious incident, you might talk about how, excuse me, the text challenges our perceptions of what is normal. Okay, that might be one idea. The text reveals how searching for the truth can lead to individual growth or character growth. Okay, searching for the truth, which is what Christopher's trying to do in that text, can lead to individual growth because it's a Bildungsroman story. It's a coming of age story. He matures. Another point might be that, so we've got 2 points there. Okay, another point might be about uncertainty. I'm trying to think. Yeah, like actually, let's go with stemming from the first point about it challenges our understanding of what is normal, right? The text invites us to embrace human differences. That's a connected but different point, right? One is saying, hey, we're going to challenge your understanding of what's normal, and then we're actually going to say there's a benefit to embracing people who are different, who are diverse in their ways of thinking, and then ultimately everyone should try to search for the truth, the overall truth, not just our truth, in order to grow as an individual, right? So you're like 3 core ideas there. They would relate to any question as long as you're using lots of form. So with curious incident, the key is use lots of form and stylistic elements in your response. So curious incident, that's framed by an unreliable first-person narrative voice. It's framed from Christopher's perspective, okay? It's an unconventional murder mystery novel. It's got the Bildungsroman structure, right? It's also a Bildungsroman genre. What else? It has a stream of consciousness style, right? It's like Christopher's thoughts are being written onto the page. It's got the unique chapter ordering with the prime numbers. It uses a couple of visuals in there. It uses lots of polysyndeton where, there's an accumulation where there's like long lists of things included. Christopher also digresses a lot. He goes from one topic to another. These are stylistic elements that if you make them your main priority in terms of selecting your evidence, and you get quotes to support all of those, they're the most adaptable because the Module B questions, for instance, for Curious Incident, want you to really appreciate the distinct form of the text, right? How it's been put together. Why is it unique? It's unique because we're hearing the story from Christopher's perspective. So it's unreliable. We can't believe everything that he's talking about. Make a point about that. Make a point about how he digresses. Make a point about the prime number ordering of the chapters to show that he thinks in that very mathematical way. Okay, so use evidence in a way that will be highly adaptable. Choose evidence in a way that will be adaptable, and that means choosing evidence that's linked to the form overall. All right, Brad, how can I effectively respond to the Module B rubric, particularly in crafting a strong thesis? I often find my thesis statements are vague. My text is a doll's house. Okay. How can I effectively respond to the Module B rubric? Okay, the thing about the Module B rubric, about a critical study, is it's not like the text and human experiences rubric where there are lots of those key terms like anomalies, paradoxes, inconsistencies, motivations, behaviors. They're all in the common module rubric. The rubric for Module B is far more vague, right? It's far more general. It really wants you to engage with the form of the text, right? So how it's being put together, what's so important about the form, and then also the context as well. So form and context are of the utmost importance for Module B. But in terms of the ideas, as long as what you're exploring taps into why the text might be a universal one, like what are the timeless ideas in there, but also what is it that makes the text unique? That's what you need to be focusing on. And unfortunately, I can't give you a more kind of specific answer there because the Module B rubric is so broad. It wants you to appreciate why that text is unique and why it's still studied. Why is it important? So try and tap into that. that's going to help you a lot, because if you make form the way the text has been put together, like what's the narrative voice, what's the structure, what's the general style of the narration, what's the style of the language, why is all of that important in terms of the ideas that it's trying to embody? Because the form is embodying the ideas. And when you embody the ideas through the form, you get that textual integrity. And it's up to you to specify what those key ideas are based on your studies and your research. Come up with a specific idea, but make sure it's something that always relates to the form overall and that's been influenced by the context. So if you keep coming back to context and form and the ideas come from that, that's going to give you a really solid and adaptable thesis. But there are no other terms really in the Module B rubric that you have to be worried about. It's just the form, the context, and obviously showing that you've had a critical study of the text, maybe by including a critic in your response at some point, or by appreciating different critical perspectives more generally. So like feminist perspective, postmodern perspective, etc. Okay? Different ways to engage with it, but it's not going to be as direct. Focus on engaging directly with the question you are given, not the rubric as much, okay? Keep all the things I said about the rubric in mind, but you really need to focus on the question, because the question will tend to be very specific for Module B. So be guided by the question and keep those other things in mind when considering what's important to your draft. All right. Hi, Mustin, sir. Sorry if I'm not saying it right, but you've just got a body paragraph for Tempest and Hagseed on the form. That's good. I will try and prioritize that for the next one. Hopefully get a session in next Wednesday. Aiming for next Wednesday, if not sooner. So I will aim for that. And I will try to remember Tempest Hagseed on form. That's priority for next week. So I'll make sure I keep an eye on that one. Last question here, Maddie B. Thanks for joining. What sort of ideas would you recommend for King Henry IV? Do you think there's a particular interpretation of how that is easier? Oh, particular interpretation of how? Well, it is a critical study, so it depends on what critical readings you've done and what you've kind of focused on in class. So I'd be hesitant to tell you about like a preferable take on how, but I think that play, if you want my personal opinion, I think that play is largely about the importance of performance in leadership, right? Performative leadership in times of turmoil, political and social turmoil. Remember, there's these rebellions going on. The king is fearful for being usurped, for someone taking over. He's just usurped Richard. He's afraid of his kingdom being usurped. And then the whole game becomes, how do we create the best model of leadership to win this war, to win these battles? So what Hal represents almost like the perfect blend of honor, which is represented by, or hyperbolized by Hotspur, but he's too extreme. You see, he's too much on honor. And then you also get this kind of lightheartedness, this somewhat relatability, I suppose, but more lightheartedness from Falstaff. He's more like the jester, right? He more represents our vices. And to be a leader at times, you need to be, and very often, you need to be relatable. You can't just be someone who no one sees, even though that was the stigma. That was a misconception at the time. I think that's what Shakespeare is trying to expose, that it's a misconception that if you're a leader like King Henry, that it's optimal to not be acquainted with the public, that, you don't need to tell a story to them and you don't need to inspire them. You can just kind of sit behind the scenes and people are going to be in awe of you. That's King Henry's perspective. Hal demonstrates that if you can actually get to know the public and create a story in their head that inspires them, then you can cultivate support, right? Now, that obviously is manipulative because he plans that all along. He says, I'm actually going to put on an act. I'm going to be this madcap. I'm going to go hang out in the tavern. I'm going to be like the commoners. I'm going to speak like them. It's all performative. But then he ascends up, right? So he basically goes from being lower class citizen to rising up, right? Notwithstanding his father's disappointment earlier when he wasn't, acting like a king or a prince, he rises up to the occasion and says, "Oh, I'm going to rise to the occasion. I'm going to actually go to battle and inspire the troops. I'm going to be a great leader." And he's basically created this narrative arc. It's like the hero's journey. It's a redemptive narrative arc. So by the end of the essay, I kind of like to tap into that he's created this story of heroism, or rather, he's created an inspiring story of redemption that can actually cultivate support and win you public favor. So that's what I like to get into there. A middle paragraph is always good to talk about the juxtaposition between the character foils, Falstaff and Hotspur, and how then they're ill-equipped to be leaders for different reasons. Okay, and then you've got King Henry. You can address at the start. He's fearful about losing his leadership role, and he has different views on leadership, of course. But he's kind of performative in a different way. He manipulates language to try and cultivate fear, whereas Howe cultivates inspiration. So you can examine those kind of ideas across the paragraphs. That's the perspective I would take on Howe. That yes, he is kind of deceiving, cunning. He is Machiavellian in a way. He's kind of ruthless in the way he does that, manipulative. But he knows how to inspire, and he knows how to tell a story that's going to ultimately foster a successful reign as king. So that's what I would kind of write about in that sense. Hopefully that helps, guys. Thank you so much for joining. I'll probably be on here next Wednesday, similar time. If you want to get more feedback, though, jump onto Jeddle.com. Go to Jedd-AI, go to the Jedd-AI page. You can start a free trial and get expert feedback from our team, from the AI as well. So, yeah, Matty B, I hope that helps then, because that's the kind of the way I approach it, right? You'll often hear about things like honor, leadership, but I think leadership and the performativity around it, that's what I would focus on, okay? And often they will leave it broad in the lead up to an assessment, but typically you'll find that it's very hard for the performative nature of leadership in those times of political turmoil not to be relevant, right? They usually are. Okay, well, thanks so much, guys. As I said, jump onto the Jedd-AI page on Jeddle, right? The Jedd-AI page on Jeddle, and that will give you access to expert feedback and our AI tools as well to get that feedback. So jump on that, check it out. Let me know what you think, and I'll see you next time. Good luck with your studies.